Israel Adesanya is without question one of the greatest strikers to have ever laced up gloves and fought within the UFC octagon. As a major star for the promotion and a current champion of the middleweight division, Izzy's growth over the years has been an absolute treat to behold, as he slowly began to tailor his style for the demands of MMA. However, to say that he has made some enemies over the years would be putting it lightly. Here's why UFC fighters hate Israel Adesanya. Number 10. Human Trash. Paulo Costa talked a big talk coming into his UFC middleweight title showdown against Israel Adesanya, but when the time came to fight, he cut a rather stationary figure, with him barely being able to get off any offense. And as soon as Israel had finished him in the second round by TKO, he furthered the embarrassment by making an inappropriate gesture behind Costa's back as the referee separated them. Once Borchina had been made aware of what had happened, his response was understandably furious, and though his own future at 185 pounds is unclear, after his weight-cutting debacle against Marvin Vettori, it does seem as though this Brazilian powerhouse would like nothing more than to get one more crack at the last stylebender. For many ways, Izzy went a bit too far with his post-fight antics, and no one is angrier about that fact than Paulo Costa himself.
I come here to talk about the action that human trash did. The human trash did after a fight. I didn't see when I was there on the cage, but I saw now. I disapprove 100%. And to me, this is mortal now. Nobody will stop me. Nobody can stop me. I am on hot of collision with you, Adesanya. I want my rematch. I will be 100% to fight him and to make him pay. That's my words. Save my words.
Number 9. If he really wanted to fight me. There was a point in time where it did really seem as though the legendary Jon Jones and Adesanya were destined to face off inside the cage. At that point, Jones was still in control of the 205-pound belt and hadn't yet committed to a run at the heavyweight title. Adesanya, on the other hand, had just won middleweight gold and was seriously considering a step up in weight for what would have been a truly massive matchup. However, by the time Izzy did move up to light heavyweight, it was, of course, Jan Blachowicz who had the belt in his possession, and we all know how that went. That said, Jones and Adesanya traded some surprisingly brutal trash talk during this time, usually over Twitter, but that didn't stop Jon from giving the media his take on Israel just prior to his most recent octagon appearance, his showdown against Dominic Reyes. Jones, in true Jones fashion, broke down Adesanya's character and accused him of being not truly interested in the fight, saying that if he really wanted to, he could have it. In reality, after watching how Blachowicz was able to outmuscle Israel, Jon likely was even more confident about his chances against the last stylebender.
It's unfortunate that me and him have to take things this way. At the end of the day, if Israel wanted to fight me, that would be a gigantic fight for the sport. A lot of people talk about, well, why are you forcing Israel to go to light heavyweight? You never went to heavyweight. There's a gigantic jump between me and the heavyweights. Me and Izzy, we're only 15, 20 pounds apart. So if Izzy really wanted to fight me, he would do it.
Number 8. The last stupid bender. Trust Colby Covington to make a truly simple but effective dig at one of his rivals. Prior to his latest defeat at the hands of Kamaru Usman, Colby predicted that he would eventually make a move up to 185 pounds to take on, in his own words, the last stupid bender, which, even if you hate the guy, is pretty funny.
Going with Jan Blachowicz, I think he can knock him out. I think that, the last stupid bender is a little twig, and he's going to get pieced up and he's going to get knocked out.
Covington, who is by no means a big 170-pounder, has never been one to back down from a challenge, and though Izzy himself has never displayed much interest in him from a competitive standpoint, the pair were at odds for a while after comments Colby made about the Black Lives Matter movement, something that struck a chord with the middleweight king. All in all, it's pretty safe to say that you shouldn't hold your breath on this one becoming a reality. Number 7. An old enemy. Alex Pereira landed in the UFC with a hugely impressive flying knee knockout in his debut, but the real story coming into this was his kickboxing rivalry with Israel Adesanya. Pereira, who was seen as one of the top 10 pound-for-pound kickboxers on the planet when he exited the sport, actually holds a brutal KO victory over Adesanya in the ring. And when asked about Izzy as a potential opponent in the future, this latest addition to the 185-pound roster accused Israel of wanting no part in a rematch, even with the differences that exist between their levels of MMA experience. All things considered, if Pereira can, in fact, make the climb, a second showdown between these two would truly be something special.
Let's just be honest, right? We don't think that he wants that because he's somehow his choice too. Alex now is an employee of the UFC, and he's on the top of the division. He could just, if he really wants to make that fight happen, why he just go there and put that guy right on the line for me now?
Number 6. When the time comes. The relationship between Kevin Holland and Israel Adesanya has had its ups and downs. Supposedly, at one earlier point, the pair shared some sly remarks aimed at each other after a chance meeting in a corridor. And though Israel seemed to act like it never happened when he met Holland for the second time, the famously mouthy middleweight contender seemed to learn all he needed to about Adesanya there and then.
So obviously, for some reason, this motherfucker don't like me. But fuck him, right? Because I don't really care about him too much, except for the simple fact that he's played with me a couple times. Now I gotta beat his ass or do something else to him.
Holland has indeed come on some tough times in the UFC, losing 2 of his last 3 outings. But if he can work on his wrestling chops and find his way into contention, can you imagine just how crazy a press conference between these two would be? The backstory is there, and these two absolutely love having a mic in front of their faces. So let's just keep our fingers crossed. Remember, if you're enjoying our content and want to see more, be sure to leave a like before subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Number 5. He never gives me credit. Marvin Vettori is a man who has more than a few reasons to dislike Israel Adesanya. The two engaged in a truly vicious rivalry ahead of their UFC 263 showdown for the middleweight belt, a fight that was actually their second bout between this pair. And though Vettori seemed not to get on with Adesanya before this, after their matchup, his hatred for the champ took on another level of meaning entirely. Whenever asked about his feelings on that 5-round affair, the Italian is never afraid to speak candidly, telling us all that he thinks Israel's fighting style is boring, to put it lightly. And from his perspective, it's understandable. Izzy more or less nullified Vettori's constant forward pressure by pot-shotting him relentlessly from the first bell to the last. And in the dying seconds, as Marvin shot for what was a fairly meaningless takedown, Adesanya used the opportunity to mock him openly. Vettori, to this day, still thinks that he won the first matchup between these two, even if the second was a bit more conclusive. All in all, after his own 205-pound victory over Paulo Costa, it does seem like this powerful contender is just one big win away from securing a third fight with the champ. So watch this space.
He's full of shit, man. He never gives me credit, but he knows what's up, you know. I'm the only guy that's gonna beat him, and eventually I will, you know. Okay. It's just a matter of time, you know. Let's see how it goes with Whitaker, but you know, I'm right there, and I'm the biggest opposition for him, and he knows that. It's just a matter of time that I'm gonna win that title. So.
Number 4. A future rematch? It's easy to forget now, but Derek Brunson and Israel Adesanya were involved in a pretty huge grudge match a few years ago, something that was fueled by an earlier career meeting that went south. According to Brunson, Izzy seemed to think that he was disrespected by his future opponent after a chance meeting backstage. This eventually grew into a genuine hatred between the two prior to their one-round matchup at UFC 230, a fight that Adesanya won in extremely convincing fashion. Nowadays, with Brunson and his newly blonde hair riding a hugely impressive win streak, it does appear as though these two will eventually meet again. And if we had to guess, their feud will likely spring up some very interesting exchanges when that time comes. As one of the best wrestlers in the division, people point to Brunson as a very interesting stylistic threat to Stylebender, but only time will tell how that one will actually play out.
So he came back and he took it years later, and he's like, Derek blew me off. I'm like, bro, what are you talking about? Like, I was headed to like meet with Dana, you know? So that was like the first interaction we had. Well, he won't look at me. So he won't make eye contact with me. So he focused on the fight. He's saying what he needed to say, but I'm sure, I know he's aware. I mean, he's talking a good fight. He's talking, hey, I'm gonna get the finish, blah, blah, blah. But he knows he's in store for a tough one.
Number 3. Some extra help? If there's one thing that can bring a legacy crashing down in an instant, it's steroid allegations. And though nothing was ever proven when it came to the odd lump that appeared on Israel Adesanya's chest prior to his clash with Paulo Costa, that didn't stop many of Izzy's fellow fighters from speculating about his legitimacy. The lump in question looked to be a clear example of gynecomastia, or gyno for short, a side effect of hormonal instability after a cycle of steroids. Adesanya himself claimed that it was simply a result of him smoking too much weed, but given that he never tested positive and the UFC said his story checked out, this never became anything more than speculation. Number 2. An underwhelming matchup. You'd be forgiven for thinking that Yoel Romero and Israel Adesanya had something of a playful relationship after their extremely fun dance-off in their lead-up to the UFC 248 clash, but there was always an undercurrent of tension between these two. However, after their fight turned out to be one of the most disappointing matchups of the year, things took on another level of animosity entirely. To some, it was Yoel's fault that the fight was so boring, as he looked to conserve energy and counter his opponent whenever possible. But according to Romero himself, Adesanya was guilty of not giving him the fight that the fans deserves, calling him a disappointment, while making a controversial comment about Israel's African ancestry, contributing to him being an excellent runner.
He says that you have to remember that his descendants from Africa were great runners, and that he forgot that. He should have planned better for that.
Though Romero now plies his trade in Bellator, the lack of resolution to this rivalry would lead up to believe that these two are still not on good terms whatsoever. It was a fight that was billed as a collision of two unmissable middleweight greats, and unfortunately, what we got was something that left many fans quite upset. Number 1. His greatest rival. The former UFC middleweight champion, Robert Whittaker, may be widely regarded as one of the nicest guys in the sport of mixed martial arts, but even he was forced to admit that he has a very low opinion of Israel Adesanya. The pair, of course, shared the octagon for the fight that saw the Reaper lose his belt after what was a rather one-dimensional performance. But when asked for his take on the champion in their first fight, Whittaker made it clear that he has very little time for the last style bender, going as far as to say that his personal dislike of Israel contributed to his performance. In his own words, he was emotional in that matchup, and with an eye on their UFC 271 rematch, fans of Whittaker will be hoping that he comes in with a more cerebral mindset than before. Now riding on a 3-fight win streak that saw him claim victories over Darren Till, Jared Cannonier, and Kelvin Gastelum, it does appear as though Whittaker is at the very least the second best fighter in the division, something that will make his eagerly anticipated showdown with Izzy one of the most intriguing fights in the UFC middleweight history. Whether he can perform better the second time or not is anyone's guess, but it does seem like Whittaker is not going to let the bad blood cloud his mind this time around.
And like, I don't know, let's not talk too much about Israel because I think he's a piece of shit.
Right. Why?
He's just a shit person. He's a
Is he?
shit person. Yeah, no, piece of shit is too rough, too harsh. He's a shithead. Yeah, that sounds better. He's a shithead. I don't like him. He doesn't like me. We just like that. We just do two cats on two different paths that just don't get along.
And that will just about do it for this video. Again, if you enjoyed today's video and want to see more, be sure to leave a like and a comment before subscribing to the channel so you can stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. Thanks for watching.